For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNews Global. I'm Nitin Gokhale and you are on The Gist, our daily program. And on The Gist this evening, we have a guest from Europe, from Austria to be precise, good friend, old friend Velina Tchakarova, who's a European affairs specialist and also a deep China watcher, India-China relations, Europe-China relations, as well as someone who's been commenting quite openly and provocatively, if I may add that word, on what Europe is doing with China or what Russia has done in the Ukraine war. Welcome to New Delhi, Velina, and welcome to this program.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be in India and to be on your show.
Thank you. So, first up, I just heard you speaking at one of the conferences, the Raisina Dialogue, which the Indian Ministry of External Affairs and ORF hosts jointly in Delhi. And on one of the panels, you actually ended the panel discussion by saying, while facing China or facing the China challenge, the United States and Europe will need India more than anybody else. That's quite a bold statement to make for a European and someone who works in a European think tank. So why do you think that will happen, and why does India figure so prominently in your own studies vis-a-vis China?
Thank you very much for outlining these remarks I made at Raisina 2022, and I made them actually with the conviction of a geopolitical analyst who has been following global system transformation for quite some time now. Now, obviously, there is a new great power equilibrium emerging and it will reshape the international relations. Of course, we do not know exactly the outcome, whether it will end up in a situation of a bifurcation that would mean Cold War 2.0 scenario with two system powers, or whether it be Pax Americana 2.0. There are different scenarios, but in all of these different scenarios, there will be one major player that will actually play a significant role, and that will not be the European Union. It will be India. India is obviously on the rise in terms of geo-economic clout, in terms of geo-economic potential that needs to be explored first and foremost and needs to be developed, but also in terms of hard power, because there is one significant component that the European Union and member states are lacking, and that is hard power. All the relevant regional players and great powers have this hard power and are ready and willing to use it when it comes to national interests. This goes for India, this goes for China, this goes for Russia as we saw it, and of course this goes for the United States. So this is why I think that in this important transitionary period of the international relations, it will be very much about the Indo-Pacific. I called it the Indo-Pacific decade, but most likely it will be the Indo-Pacific century. And on the one side, we are going to witness an increasing tension between the two Asian giants. So here we have a key role for India. On the other side, we are going, of course, to witness deepening systemic competition between the United States and China, which will be decisive for the future of the global order. Once again, India is going to play a key role and not the other way around, which means that the United States will be increasingly reliant on the support of India in this competition. And last but not least, the huge economic growth that is being projected, once again, where? In East Asia, in the ASEAN region, in the Indo-Pacific region. Once again, India has to play a major role. So all of this put together actually comes to show that India is on the rise. The way how India is going to shape its role, it's up to Indian and the Indian political elite, of course. But once again, other great powers will have to come to terms with these realities.
Absolutely, and that is being proven increasingly if you look at the roster of visitors to New Delhi in the past couple of months. European leaders, American officials, American senators, the Japanese Prime Minister, the Australians coming in increasing numbers. So clearly India is a key player. But there is also this criticism about India in the West, especially in Europe and US, that India hesitates to take sides despite its rising status. It abstained, as somebody pointed out in that question, that session that you were in, 12 times it abstained in the United Nations when it came to condemning Russia. Is India's rise or India's contribution to geopolitics or changing equation of geopolitics inevitable? Or do you think there is still some lingering doubts in Europe where you actually are situated, and you think the Europeans will still have some doubts about endorsing or coming to terms with India's rise?
Okay, we have to unpack that because there are obviously a lot of let's say misperceptions. The first thing, of course, is there was indeed this question about the abstention of India in the UN Security Council. But then again, if I were to answer this question, I would have also pointed to another reality, and that is that India has always relied on Russia and Russia's backing for India's position on Kashmir when it came to the UN Security Council, something that no other Western power would have ever given India as a leverage.
That's right.
So, of course, here the question is, if India is to pursue its national interests, it would, of course, side with Russia on specific issues, international issues, because I do not foresee that the United States or France or Great Britain would actually propose to replace Russia in terms of support in the UN Security Council, right? And the Kashmir issue is very important for India. Now, so we have to always differentiate. It's easy to only present the one side of the coin, and here I'm presenting the other side of the coin.
That's
when it
right.
comes to important issues for Russia, then India, of course, is abstaining, is remaining neutral, but in reality is actually supporting Russia's position. And this is, from an Indian point of view, the right thing to do. Now, when it comes to the European understanding, the Western understanding, here there is this danger that Western decision makers want to have it all packaged. They want to put everything into one package: human rights, democratization, good governance, geopolitical issues, hard power, security, military. It's not possible. So, in reality, if they want to pursue authentic alliances and partnerships with third countries, they have to also learn to differentiate things and to develop acceptance also for the interests and the goals and objectives of other countries. You cannot have it all, and obviously it's not going to work out this time according to Western understanding. On the opposite, on the contrary. Now, the very fact, as you outlined, that Western powers are courting India, coming to New Delhi, shows the importance of India rather than the importance of European powers and Washington in these dire times, because they are the ones in a dire need to diversify relations.
True.
India is more or less, and this is something that has been proven historically, to work in historic terms for India, has this kind of self-reliance mindset, DNA, not only in terms of the non-alignment movement, but it's obviously not going to side with one or other power.
Some call it strategic autonomy.
For the sake of, any kind of Western-like alliances or understanding.
Or
of such.
fitting into the Western agenda or the narrative.
Exactly. So here, once again, we have to be very careful to not impose Western concepts or Western understanding of partnerships, and to be very truthful and authentic about it, what we want, but also what we do not want from a relationship. And I think this is the way how to move forward. It's not going to work like it was in the 20th century. Yes, we have this full package, and we can also promote, all these different dimensions in the relationship. There are indeed good things that Europe, for instance, can offer to India.
Yes.
In return of a solid geo-economic relationship.
Absolutely.
There are indeed things like good governance or soft power issues that are very much relevant for the population, capability development, things that really have proved to be workable in in the relations with third countries. In the last 3 decades, and I think that this is something that India can benefit from.
True.
But not on conditionality.
Not on conditionality. That's the point that I was trying to make. But we will come back to Europe and India future relationship or what it holds, what promise it holds. But let me take you back to the conflict raging right now in Europe and Russia's move against Ukraine. Was Europe caught unawares that Russia will do this, or as Russians keep saying, and many analysts have commented, that it was Europe that provoked Russia into doing what it has done, because it has been talking about the danger of coming closer and closer, NATO coming closer and closer to the Russian borders. So who would you actually blame for this current situation? Russia, of course, is the invader, it's the aggressor. But was it forced into this kind of an action? Or what's the sense in Europe?
Okay, first, I'm not in the position to blame anybody. That's not my role as a geopolitical actor. A geopolitical expert is to understand actors' behavior, not to assess it, and definitely not in normative terms.
Yes.
So I want to understand it, and I also want to assess it in the most correct manner. I mean, the most plausible way possible. So here I will present my reading, my assessment, and then I can also outline some of the mainstream, positions that are popular in Europe and also in Russia,
right?
Because I've been following both sides, obviously. Now, my understanding, my assessment is, and I said this already in December, I was absolutely sure that Russia is going to attack.
We saw your tweets.
I
we read your tweets.
Time step of what I was expecting. So I was also pointing to the date, which would be after 20th of February because of the Olympic Games, because the Russian president would have never screwed basically spoiled the Olympic Games for China. Knowing how important they were for boosting this diplomatic image after 2 years of pandemic. But what I basically so wrong was the scale of the war. So I was absolutely sure that it will be in the eastern and southern part of Ukraine, which we are now observing with the second phase of the offense. But I would have never anticipated, at least not per 2022, that it will be a full-scale war, that he will actually go back, because the Russian president went all in this war. He attacked Ukraine from all possible directions.
True.
He tried from the
northern part
of Belarus. He tried from the north to attack the capital and to impose a regime change. He tried also from the whole western, from the whole western border of Russia, eastern border of Ukraine, and then he attacked also from the south. And this obviously did not work out. So what was the approach? What was the plan? My assessment is that it was a three-dimensional approach. First and foremost, it was from the very beginning, and it has never stopped for the last 30 years, and specifically since the last 8 years, it was a constant preparation for this moment. It was, of course, an act against Ukraine. Namely, that the very existence of this country as a sovereign country had to be denied. Ukraine in the sense of, in the mindset of the Russian president, does not exist as a country.
Right.
And of course, it also had a lot to do with the modernization, with the orientation, with the foreign policy, security policy orientation of the country. The country was drifting
to west.
And this was not acceptable. Right. Now, the second dimension is one that was obviously against Europe as a whole. Here, the idea was to also attack the legal regime, which was, existent after the collapse of the, after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. This was a reminiscence of the Cold War. In the eyes of the Russian president, this European security architecture was unjust and it was not suiting Russian interests.
True.
And by showing how geopolitically irrelevant European powers have become, because if you think about it, we were anticipating a war, but in fact, no European power was actually able. No, it's even worse than that. Okay. It was not only about the lack of preparation. It was in fact the inability to prevent this war from happening. This is a major difference. And here we see the psychological effect also, the long-term psychological effect.
Yes.
The inability to prevent a war means also that more or less you are geopolitically irrelevant because you do not have leverage to impose to pursue your national interests or to impose your interests over others. And then the third important dimension, this was hugely overlooked in Europe, was the systemic dimension. I also argue that the Russian president seized the moment to prepare for the long game. Right. Basically, the systemic competition between China and United States to take a pole position. Because by closing the chapter in Eastern Europe, by seizing control over Ukraine, you can focus on the Indo-Pacific. You can focus on other geo-economic terrains and geopolitical terrains. You can focus on Central Asia. You can focus on South Asia. There was this vertical expansion from the Arctic through the Eastern Europe, but then again also Central Asia, take Eastern Mediterranean, the war in Syria. So you look at this map and you see how now he was also expanding military presence of Russia in Africa with the possibility of an access to the Indian Ocean. So obviously he wanted to close this chapter also to turn Russia into a kind of indispensable player, probably similar to the scenario in the 70s, where China was this indispensable player between the Soviet Union and United States, and in a sense to show both America and China, you have to come to terms with us because neither of you will be able to win this competition without us. Yes. So it was not about appealing. It was not about that any of both wanted Russia to be part of their bloc or their alliance, but it was more about we do not want to see Russia being part of the other's bloc. And I think that this was a very important dimension that was also part of the the decision of the Russian president. The timing, of course, was important as well. It was because of a sum of factors, external factors. So if you look at the factors that led to this decision, in my view, there was a sum of also very, very different, triggers. One, obviously, being the U.S. leadership, namely that the Russian president factored in a kind of neutral position by America because of the upcoming midterms elections in November. That means that no U.S. president would ever get militarily involved prior to these elections. Then again, if you look at Germany, France, the most important European powers, there was a reshuffle of power in both of them because of elections. And then, of course, there was no other, external obstacle that was, more or less staying in the way. Now, when we look at the mainstream positions, of course, there is a common narrative now coming from Russia that it was more or less about the NATO expansion over the last 30 years following the collapse of the Soviet Union. If you ask me personally, this narrative is more or less meant for internal consumption, because the invasion of Ukraine in 2014 was not about NATO expansion. The NATO expansion was not on the agenda. It was in fact about European Union enlargement, and right now, as we are hearing from the negotiations, apparently European Union enlargement is not an obstacle.
No.
So obviously this is not
So
really
this is just a domestic consumption,
narrative.
like you said.
When it comes to the mainstream narrative coming from Europe, from the West here, it is one that is, I think, shared by the international community to a large extent, and that is, of course, it's an unprovoked, illegitimate war. Ukraine did not give any reasons no provocation whatsoever. And if you look at how the war also started, how they actually tried, basically to subjugate the whole territory, not just parts of the territory.
Right, you said, yeah.
I think that in this particular case, it's obvious that it's in violation of international law. It's aggression par excellence. And now, it turned out also where I think the Russian president miscalculated, not only in the scope and scale of Western support, but also I think he miscalculated in the way how he had to conduct this war. I think that the political ambitions did not match the military preparations. I think that the military personnel, the generals were not only were kept in the dark until the very last moment when it came to the real political plans.
Right.
And when there is no match between politics and
the objectives don't match.
Achieve on the ground. Yeah. We saw obviously what
is happening there.
What kind of situation emerged. So now in the second offense, it's already about an existential war for Russia. This war, if it's not won by Russia, it will have devastating effects on the Russian leadership. It may have an existential, threat for the Russian president per se, and it certainly will have a devastating effect on Russia's positioning in the world afterwards. So
no matter how this pans out,
no matter how it
pans out, it is a devastating effect on everyone across the globe. And geoeconomics, geopolitical equations have changed for the good. So in that context, let's look at how Europe and India can develop their relationship going forward. How will they now look at which are the areas to work in? Like you mentioned right at the beginning that Europe and United States needs India for various reasons, not just currently, but in the future likely conflict or competition with China. But just confining ourselves to Europe and India, what is it that Europe can offer to India? India can offer a hedge against China, certainly, but what can Europe offer to India?
Now, if there is one specific development that I'm absolutely optimistic about, it is the relationship between the European Union and India, given the whole circumstances with the pandemic, with the competition between the United States and China, and also now, obviously, with the war in Ukraine. When it comes to the relationship between the European Union and India, first and foremost, I need to clarify for our audience that Europe is a very complicated mechanism of political decision making, because we have on the one side 27 European member states, on the other side we have the institutions, and here we see an overlap.
Right.
Of understanding how important India has become. That means that the leadership on both sides, institutions, this of course is, I'm referring specifically to the European Commission.
Yes.
But also when it comes to the European capitals, we saw strategic documents about Indo-Pacific, and here of course it's about India, coming from the Netherlands, from Germany, from France, now even from Italy.
Right.
And of course the Brits were always interested, and they have also presented their strategic document. So this is the one side of the story. The other side of the story is that the Commission also introduced many important documents. We have now a Indo-Pacific strategy. Of course, India is mentioned the most, central to it, with specific areas of cooperation. We have a connectivity strategy, also with India, of course, being at the center of it, and there are so many avenues for cooperation that I'm even starting to fear that it's so much about ambition, but it will be much more about, in the future, it will be more important to implement. Where I see the most required implementation is when it comes to connectivity. Connectivity is this buzzword, I know that, but think about the One Belt, One Road. When it was launched 2013,
yes,
we were more or less,
convinced
that this is, not just a PR thing, but it's much more than that. And then it turned to be a Belt and Road initiative in 2015. And now Europe came up with an own project, which is the Global Gateway.
Right.
The Global Gateway should be a counterweight when it comes to building infrastructure outside of Europe. So once again, India will be definitely at the center of it.
Right.
It is about 300 billion of euro. 150 was dedicated to Africa. So we still have 150 billion euro, which will be open for discussion. Here I see a very interesting development when it comes to building infrastructure. India needs to also get its corridors, transport corridors, and also,
energy corridors, transport corridors.
Exactly, towards European markets. So one way will be, of course, through the Indian Ocean. Another way would be also to think about West Asia, and then Eastern Mediterranean, and then we have once again, opportunities to develop these corridors. Another important issue would be maritime presence. We need to be more present in the Indian Ocean. We need to be perceived as a maritime power. If we want to be also security provider, we need to do our homework.
Right.
And here, once again, we have, achieved some progress. We are having our own operations in eastern coast of Africa, but we are reaching out. We want to reach out to India. To do more naval exercises, maritime military presence.
Absolutely.
And where we see a niche which will be interesting for India is capability development, where we can also contribute.
So green technology, green energy technology.
Then, of course, exactly. Then green technology is digitalization, where India has also a lot to offer in the digitalization, which is why there was 2 days ago, Technological and Trade Council between the European Union and India was announced.
Right.
This is definitely good news, because a similar one was also launched between the European Union and the United States. So obviously this will be major issues. Riding the wave of the fourth industrial revolution, how to ride it together, how to create, an old story. This, I think, is going to be very important.
Yeah,
for
the
both
synergy
actors.
is there very much. The potential is there. Implementation could be an issue going forward. Do you think?
Specifically here, I see the biggest need in terms of negotiating and finalizing and adopting a free trade agreement between the European Union and India. It will open up the common market for Indian products, for Indian services, for Indian capital, for Indian human capital as well, of course, for Indian data, and vice versa. And here, of course, we talk about two very heavy bureaucratic
systems.
Actors.
Yeah.
So we need to, understand each other much better. We need to talk, more often with each other, and we need to maybe become more flexible, more adaptive, because this is the 21st century. Things have to happen very quickly, very, we have to go with the flow. We cannot be this heavy bureaucratic system.
Slow-moving systems.
Slow-moving system. We cannot afford, because these negotiations were put on hold in 2013.
Right.
Now they relaunched them, which was the right moment. And if we are to expect 10 years of negotiations,
then
the
it
world
will not get
not be
anywhere,
waiting
will not
for
stop.
us.
Yeah.
And in fact, both will capitalize on opening the common market, and also opening this huge Indian market for European services and for European goods. So it can be a really, it can turn into a real geoeconomic cloud, where both preserve their understanding of democracy, of political order, and also what I've been also pushing for this kind of understanding that we do not want to be squeezed in the competition between United States
and China.
We do not want to be caught in this binary world. We want our own story.
Options to be there.
And the option would be to merge forces. And by merging forces, we have enough leverage to have a third way.
True. And I think this is the opportune moment, as you said. I think Ukraine war, pandemic, and China's increasing belligerence has given us this opportunity. Thank you very much for your thoughts, Velina, and thank you for visiting India. Your first time, I believe, coming to New Delhi.
Definitely.
We will look forward to more such visits from you and more such insightful discussions. Thanks for the moment, for this forward-looking agenda that you have set out in this discussion. For the moment, it's thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I will look forward to coming again to your show and to India, of course.
Thank you. So that was Velina speaking to us about the future of India-Europe relations, and probably a win-win situation for both. Do keep watching StratNews Global. You know where to reach us. If you've already subscribed, please tell your friends, family and acquaintances to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And of course, keep sending us feedback. Your comments are always welcome. And we do hope to bring you more such informative discussions with experts in their own field. For the moment, it's goodbye.